The day had started like any other for him. He wasn't anyone special, just a regular human. Technician working at an interspecies medical station that floated quietly above a peaceful planet. He had been on this assignment for a few months, and by now, the strange mix of alien designs, distant stars, and unusual medical tools felt normal to him. Even the alien queen's visits had become a routine part of his job, although he still felt nervous every time she walked in with her royal guard. He always tried to stay polite, quiet, and focused. The queen was calm and respectful, but her presence carried a heaviness that made people straighten up the second she entered the room. Her nurse, on the other hand, was the opposite, gentle, soft-spoken, and always watching him with careful eyes, as if studying how humans behaved. She wasn't unfriendly. She simply observed everything. That morning, he had been assigned to help with a simple inspection of the queen's protective chest plate. It was part armor, part medical device, something their species used to regulate internal energy levels. He had assisted with it before, so he approached the work with confidence. The queen stood tall and still, letting the nurse guide him through the adjustments. She rarely spoke, but she nodded politely whenever he asked for permission to touch a panel or adjust something. The nurse, as always, stood nearby to double-check everything to make things less tense. He sometimes made small jokes. Nothing loud or silly, just small comments to ease the pressure. Usually the nurse would give him a small look, half amused, half curious, and the queen would remain expressionless. But on that particular day, the nurse seemed even more serious than usual, watching every motion he made with her deep, glowing eyes. As he reached for the last latch on the chest plate, something slipped from his hand. It made a tiny sound barely noticeable, but enough to make the nurse tilt her head. She leaned in slightly and whispered to him, "Careful. That part reacts strongly to sudden pressure." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was more like a quiet reminder. And without thinking, without planning, he responded the way he sometimes would back home when someone warned him about a delicate tool or machine. "Yes, dear," he said casually. The words slipped out before his mind fully processed what he had said. It was one of those phrases people say without meaning anything by it, a playful, harmless joke. At the moment the words left his mouth, the room went strangely quiet. The queen didn't move, but her guard shifted slightly, glancing at each other. The nurse blinked slowly, her expression shifting from calm to something unreadable. He froze, then slowly lowered his hands from the latch. He hadn't meant anything by it. It was just a reflex, a small joke to lighten the air. But now he felt the weight of the mistake settle in the room like a dropped stone. The nurse stared at him for several seconds, more curious than offended. Then, unexpectedly, she gave him the smallest smile. It wasn't teasing or mocking. It was approving. He didn't know what that meant, but he felt a tiny rush of panic. I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly, trying to salvage the situation. "It's just something humans say. Just a joke. A small one." The nurse didn't seem bothered by his explanation. In fact, her eyes softened even more. "Understood," she said quietly, but her tone didn't match her words. It felt like she had decided something on her own, something he didn't fully understand. He finished adjusting the chest plate as carefully as possible, not making a single unnecessary sound. The nurse continued to watch him, but with a warmth he hadn't seen before. The queen stood calmly, but every few minutes he felt her gaze shift toward him as if assessing him in a new light. When the inspection ended, the queen nodded in approval the way she always did. The nurse took a final look at the device, pressed a few buttons, then stepped back. Everything seemed normal again, and he thought maybe the awkward moment had passed. But as they were preparing to exit the medical bay, another team of medical workers entered, bowing to the queen. They greeted the nurse as well. One of them looked at him curiously, probably wondering why a human technician had been assigned such an important role. The nurse stepped forward to explain the situation, gesturing toward him with a calm smile. "He is assisting with the Queen's equipment today," she said. Then, with a tone that sounded almost casual, she added, "He works well, very attentive, and he is the Queen's partner." The room froze. He blinked. The other workers stared. Even the Queen turned slightly, almost as if checking whether she heard correctly. Partner? He felt his heart jump into his throat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He wanted to correct her, to say something, anything, but the words refused to form. The nurse didn't appear confused or embarrassed. She said it as if it were an accepted fact, something obvious to everyone except him. She gave him a kind look, almost reassuring, as if she believed she was helping him by giving him that title. He raised his hand slightly, trying to gesture that it wasn't true, but one of the workers immediately looked away respectfully, as if avoiding intruding on a private matter between him and the Queen. This was bad. Extremely bad. He tried to speak quietly to the nurse. "Why did you call me that? I didn't mean anything earlier. The phrase I used wasn't serious." The nurse leaned closer, her voice soft but firm. "I understand you did not intend harm," she said, "but your tone was gentle. Your behavior showed trust. In our culture, using such a phrase in a moment of responsibility and care carries great meaning." He swallowed, realizing this wasn't a misunderstanding of language. It was a misunderstanding of culture. On their world, simple phrases could carry deep personal significance. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You acted with sincerity." "That is enough," she replied. "Enough for what?" He wondered. Before he could ask, the Queen's attendants approached him with polite bows. One of them asked if he required assistance or accommodation as the Queen's chosen companion. His face went red instantly. He waved his hands quickly, trying to deny it, but they misinterpreted his panic as modesty. The Queen herself said nothing, but she studied him with a calm, thoughtful gaze, as if evaluating him in a new role he had never applied for. He felt the walls closing in. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was turning into something bigger, something official. And all because of two small words, he said without thinking. By the time the Queen and her guards left the room, everyone in the corridor had already heard about the announcement. Whispered conversations followed him everywhere. Some looked surprised, some curious, and some impressed, as if he had stepped into a position of honor without even realizing it. He leaned against the wall, feeling dizzy. All he had wanted was to make the room a little less tense. Now he was apparently committed to some royal-level relationship in a culture he barely understood. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. This had to be fixed. He couldn't let an innocent joke turn into political confusion. But he also had to be careful not to offend the Queen, not to insult her culture, not to disrespect the nurse, who seemed genuinely kind. He wasn't. Sure, what worried him more, the misunderstanding itself, or the possibility that the Queen might actually start believing it. But one thing was clear. This mistake wasn't going away easily. And deep down, he knew that by tomorrow, the entire station would be looking at him differently. The next morning, he woke up hoping everything would somehow return to normal. Maybe the nurse would correct the misunderstanding. Maybe the Queen's staff would realize it was just a harmless human expression. Maybe everyone would finally stop staring at him like he carried a secret no one else knew. But the moment he stepped out of his small station room, he knew none of that had happened. The hallway was buzzing. 2 medical workers passed him, whispering quickly before pretending they hadn't said anything. Another one gave him an awkward bow, which made him almost choke. A guard standing near the elevator stiffened and saluted him, even though he wasn't part of security. He tried to keep his face calm, but inside he felt his stomach tightening. This wasn't fading. It was growing. When he entered the medical bay, the atmosphere felt even stranger. People stopped what they were doing just to look at him. Not in a rude way. More like they wanted to see how someone like him had ended up connected to their queen. It made him feel heavier with every step. The same nurse from yesterday was standing near a holographic screen, organizing the queen's schedule. She looked as calm as always, but when she saw him, her expression softened. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it felt like some kind of welcome. He walked toward her slowly, gathering his courage. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. She nodded and gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. He followed her there, feeling dozens of eyes watching his back. When they stopped, he let out a breath he had been holding. "I really didn't mean for all this to happen," he said in a rushed voice. "Everyone thinks something is going on, and it's not. I just said 2 words. It didn't mean anything. It was only a joke." The nurse listened patiently, hands folded neatly in front of her. When he finished, she blinked once, as if thinking carefully about how to explain things in a way he could understand. "I understand your intention," she said softly. "But intention is not always the whole message." He frowned. "But I wasn't serious at all." "To you," she replied. "But among our people, words spoken gently during a moment of shared responsibility carry emotional weight. And you were helping the queen directly. You used a phrase that, in our culture, suggests trust and harmony between 2 beings." He rubbed his forehead. "It's just something humans say, sometimes even to strangers. It doesn't mean anything romantic, or whatever your people think it means." She tilted her head, observing him with curiosity. "You humans use such meaningful words without meaning? That is unusual to us. On our world, casual expressions are rare. When we speak in a warm tone, it is taken very seriously." He sighed. "Well, on Earth, we say a lot of things casually. Sometimes far too casually." The nurse thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I see. But still, when you said it, you were calm, respectful, and focused on the queen's safety. That combination made everyone believe you declared a special bond." He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "So I accidentally proposed some sort of connection?" "Not exactly proposed," she said gently, "but suggested compatibility." He leaned against the wall, overwhelmed. Compatibility with the queen. The idea felt impossible, almost comical, yet no one around him was laughing. Before he could say anything else, a group of officials entered the bay, and the nurse straightened up. They were high-ranking staff. He recognized their robes and badges. They approached him with polite seriousness, which made his nerves jump. One of them stepped forward. "We have a request for your presence," the official said. "We would like to ask some questions about your relationship with the queen." He nearly choked again. "Relationship? What relationship?" "I think there's a misunderstanding," he tried to say, but the official raised a gentle hand. "This is only a formal inquiry," the official said reassuringly. "For clarity, the court wishes to understand if your connection has diplomatic significance." Diplomatic significance. That sounded even worse. He glanced at the nurse, hoping she would explain everything for him, but she stayed silent, giving him a small encouraging nod instead. It felt like she believed he could handle it. He followed the officials to a quiet room, feeling like he was walking into a meeting he had never signed up for. They asked him polite questions: how long he had been working there, how he found the queen's presence, how he interpreted the nurse's words. Every question felt like walking on thin ice. Each time he insisted it was just a joke. They scribbled notes, nodding slowly, as if analyzing his every expression. At one point, the official asked, "When you said those words to the nurse, did you feel calm?" He blinked. "I mean, I guess so." It was a normal work moment. The official nodded. Calmness is a sign of comfort. Comfort suggests closeness. He felt helpless. I was just doing my job. More nodding. More notes. No one seemed offended, but no one seemed convinced either. When the questioning was finally over, he returned to the medical bay, feeling mentally exhausted. The moment he arrived, more people looked at him with new expressions, some curious, some thoughtful, some even respectful. Word had clearly spread faster than he could keep up. The Queen entered the bay shortly after, and everyone stood straighter. She glanced at him briefly, not coldly, not warmly, just observingly, as if trying to understand him the same way everyone else was. Her presence didn't feel intimidating this time. It felt heavy with meaning he didn't know how to read. The nurse approached him quietly after the Queen's checkup. "You handled the questions well," she said. "I don't think I did," he replied with a tired sigh. "You did," she said calmly. "You spoke honestly, and honesty is respected." He looked at her. "Can't you just tell them it was a misunderstanding? You know I didn't mean anything serious." The nurse didn't answer immediately. She seemed to think deeply before speaking. "I could," she finally said. "But the situation is more complicated now." "Why?" he asked anxiously. "Because many believe the Queen herself accepted your words," she answered softly. "Even if you meant them lightly, she did not deny them. That silence carries weight." His heart dropped. "She didn't deny it because she didn't understand, right?" The nurse lowered her gaze slightly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps she understood more than you think." That confused him even more. "What does that mean?" "She noticed your calmness, your respect, your sincerity in your work," the nurse explained. "Those qualities matter to her kind. They matter to the court. You behaved in a way that made them see value in you." He stared at her, stunned. "So now everyone thinks I'm important?" "In a way," she replied gently. "Important to the Queen. Important to our culture. Important to the story people are already telling." He ran a hand through his hair. "This is going out of control." "It can still be corrected," she said softly. "But once a story spreads, it is not easy to gather it back." He felt that truth sitting heavy in his chest. Everywhere he walked, he could feel the whispers around him. He heard people saying things like the human who made the Queen smile, or the new partner from another world. Some of it sounded harmless, but some sounded like expectations being built. Expectations he never asked for. Later in the day, a junior worker approached him shyly. "Is it true?" the worker asked. "About you and the Queen?" He tried to smile politely. "It's a misunderstanding." The worker nodded slowly, as if trying to accept that answer, but still not fully convinced. By evening, he felt drained. Every attempt to explain only made people more curious. Every denial sounded to them like modesty. And every look from the Queen felt stronger than before, even if she didn't say a word. He sat alone in the resting area, staring at the distant stars through the glass window. The nurse joined him quietly after a while. "You are troubled," she said softly. "Of course I am," he replied with a tired voice. "I'm scared of what this could turn into." The nurse looked at him with gentle honesty. "You are not in danger. But this situation is meaningful. For us, for her. People are watching because they think something new is beginning." He exhaled slowly. "And how do I make them understand it's not?" "You speak carefully," she said. "You show respect. You wait. Sometimes misunderstandings fade. Sometimes they become something else." He stared into the glass, unsure what she meant. Unsure where this was going. Unsure how a small human phrase had started something so big, but deep in his chest, he felt something he hadn't felt before: uncertainty, mixed with a strange sense of responsibility. and he wasn't sure whether the story would end with a correction, or with a new beginning he never saw coming. The next day began with the same uneasy feeling he had felt the whole night. He hadn't slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined people staring, whispering, asking questions he didn't know how to answer. He wished everything would simply go back to normal, but deep in his heart, he knew that was impossible now. The moment he stepped out of his room, a guard greeted him politely. That alone was enough to make him tense. Guards usually ignored him unless there was a protocol order. But this one bowed slightly and said, "The Queen's nurse requests your presence in the observation room." His stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" The guard shook his head. "No, she simply wishes to speak." That didn't calm him at all. If anything, it made him more anxious. He followed the guard to the observation room, a quiet space filled with soft lights and a large window that looked out onto the planet below. The nurse stood there alone, her hands folded, her eyes calm as always. She turned when she heard him enter, and the guard stepped away respectfully. "Thank you for coming," she said gently. He nodded slowly. "You said you wanted to talk?" "Yes," she replied. "It is time I explained something important." Those words didn't ease his mind. In fact, they made him feel even more nervous. The nurse motioned for him to sit. He did, though his hands were slightly shaking. She sat across from him, keeping her posture straight and her voice soft. "You have been confused since the moment I called you the Queen's partner," she began. He exhaled sharply. "Confused is an understatement. You turned my whole life upside down with one sentence." "I understand," she replied calmly. "But I did not do it to harm you." "Then why?" he asked quietly. The nurse looked at him for a moment with an expression he hadn't seen before, something gentle, almost protective. "Our people read emotions very differently from humans," she said. "We watch body language, tone, posture, the energy of the moment. When you spoke to me, you spoke with calmness, with warmth, with sincerity." He raised his brows. "I wasn't trying to show sincerity. I was trying to make a joke." "Yes," she said. "But your body did not act like a joke. You moved gently. You worked carefully. You showed kindness to the Queen and respect to me. When you spoke the words you did, they carried a meaning deeper than you intended." He rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed again. "But that still doesn't explain why you told everyone I was her partner." The nurse took a slow breath. "Because I saw something others did not. Something dangerous." His heart froze. "Dangerous?" She nodded. "When you said those words, you unintentionally stepped into a social space that holds emotional weight for us. Many people witnessed it. Many interpreted it as a sign of connection. And in our courts, signs of connection draw attention. Not all of it kind." He stared at her in disbelief. "Are you saying someone might have targeted me?" "Yes," she answered softly. "New things often create conflict. Some would question your presence here. Some would question your connection with her. If they saw you as a meaningless visitor who accidentally stepped into royal attention, they might treat you with suspicion, or try to remove you." He felt a chill go through him. "So you called me the Queen's partner. To protect me?" The nurse nodded slowly. "A partner of the Queen is respected, protected, untouchable. No one would dare challenge you or question your presence. It was the only way to shield you from the storm that was about to form." He sat back, stunned. He hadn't expected that. He thought she did it out of misunderstanding or cultural assumption, not out of protection. He looked at her quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," she replied simply. "You were kind. You were respectful. You did not deserve the consequences of a misunderstanding." He lowered his gaze, unsure whether to feel grateful or overwhelmed. "But now," he said slowly, Everyone believes I'm actually bonded to the Queen. How do we fix that? The nurse hesitated. That alone frightened him. It can still be adjusted, she said carefully. But it will require time and patience and the Queen's agreement. He frowned. The Queen's agreement? Why does her opinion matter? I mean, of course, her opinion matters. But the nurse lifted a hand gently. I will explain. She stood and walked to the large window, looking out at the glowing clouds drifting over the planet. He followed her with his eyes, waiting for her next words. The Queen is very observant, the nurse continued. She is not blind to emotion. When you worked with her yesterday, she noticed your calmness, your steady hands, your careful attention. He felt heat rise to his face. I was just working. For you, yes. But for our people, such behavior is significant. The nurse turned slightly to face him. We believe calmness in a delicate situation shows emotional compatibility, trust, mutual respect. He ran a hand through his hair. But I wasn't trying to show any of that. It's just how I work. And your natural behavior is why this situation has grown, she said gently. Not your words alone. He stared at the floor. So to everyone here, I'm someone special. Yes, she replied simply. He felt a weight in his chest, part fear, part disbelief, and something else he couldn't name. But why is the Queen acting so calm about it? He asked. If she knew people misunderstood, she could have corrected it. The nurse studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. The Queen does not speak often. She chooses her words carefully. Silence from her is not lack of understanding. It is a choice. That only confused him more. What does her silence mean here? The nurse looked directly into his eyes. It means she did not reject the idea. He felt the air leave his lungs. You're saying she didn't mind? Not only that, the nurse said softly. She found your presence comforting. You did not fear her. You did not flatter her. You simply helped her. Honestly. Quietly. Such interactions are rare for someone of her rank. He didn't know how to respond. The idea that the Queen, someone so powerful, so respected, so calm, saw something meaningful in his behavior felt unreal. He finally managed to say, So now the court thinks I'm connected to her emotionally. And she hasn't denied it. The nurse nodded. Correct. And if I try to clear it up? You must speak carefully, she warned. A harsh denial may insult her. A careless word may cause tension. And the court is already watching you closely. He sighed deeply. Great. So either I hurt her or cause a political mess. The nurse stepped closer, her voice calm. That is why we must discuss this together. So you understand your options? He looked up at her. What options? One, she said gently. We slowly correct the misunderstanding. Step by step. Over time. So no one feels insulted. And the other? He muttered nervously. The nurse watched him for a long moment. The other is to accept it. He froze. Accept it? You mean? Become her partner? He whispered in disbelief. It is only a possibility, the nurse said calmly. Not a demand. Not an expectation. But some paths in our culture begin with misunderstanding and grow into truth. Many relationships in our history started with gentle gestures and shared responsibility. He shook his head quickly. I wasn't planning any of this. I'm just a technician. I'm not someone who belongs next to a queen. The nurse tilted her head slightly. Belonging is not decided by rank. It is decided by harmony. And the queen sees something in you. He swallowed hard, unsure what that meant. Unsure what he felt. The nurse's voice softened even more. Before you panic, understand this. Nothing will happen without your choice. You are not forced into any role. You have freedom. He nodded slowly, relieved, but still overwhelmed. "Then why does it feel like I'm trapped?" He whispered. "Because this situation is bigger than you expected," she said gently. "But you are not trapped. You are simply standing at the center of a story you did not choose." He sighed again, feeling the weight of everything. The nurse stepped back and added, "The Queen wishes to speak with you. Not today, but soon, when she is ready." His heart jumped. "Speak with me? About what?" "The misunderstanding," the nurse replied. "And what you truly want." He stared at the wall, mind racing. He didn't know what he wanted. He didn't know what he should say. All he knew was that his life had suddenly become far more complicated than he ever imagined. But beneath the fear and confusion, there was another feeling, one he didn't want to admit yet. Curiosity. What did the Queen think of him? What would she say? Why hadn't she corrected the misunderstanding? And why, deep down, did he feel a strange pull toward the moment they would finally speak? He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. Nothing about his life would ever be simple again. The next morning started slowly, almost as if the world wanted to give him a moment to breathe before facing anything new. The light coming through the window was soft, not too bright, just enough to remind him that a new day had begun, whether he felt ready or not. He sat at the edge of the bed for a while, rubbing his hands together, thinking about everything that had happened over the last few days. It felt like life had suddenly changed its pace, and he was still trying to catch up. He knew he couldn't avoid the conversations he needed to have. He had spent so much time running from problems, or pushing uncomfortable thoughts aside, hoping they would somehow sort themselves out. But now he understood things didn't fix themselves. People did. Actions did. And today, he wanted to take those actions, no matter how slow or awkward they felt. He walked into the small kitchen and made tea. The quiet sound of boiling water helped settle his thoughts. He remembered how someone once told him that life becomes easier when you stop pretending to be strong all the time. At the time, he didn't understand. Now, it made sense. Strength wasn't acting like nothing affected you. Strength was feeling everything and still choosing to move forward. After finishing his tea, he finally stepped outside. The sun had risen a little higher, and the street was already alive with small movements, children leaving for school. A shopkeeper sweeping dust away from the front of his store. An elderly man feeding birds near the corner. Life was happening, with or without him, and something about that made him feel both humbled and hopeful. His first stop was the workshop, where he had argued the day before. The moment he walked in, the smell of wood, oil, and dust hit him, the familiar scent of routines he had neglected. He saw the old worker who had been upset with him. For a moment, both men just looked at each other, unsure of who should speak first. Finally, he took a small step forward and said in a quiet voice, "I'm sorry." The older man stared at him, surprised. People rarely apologized sincerely these days, especially not adults who were used to defending themselves no matter what. But today was different. Everything felt different. "I wasn't angry about the work," the old man finally replied. "I was concerned. You seemed distracted, like something heavy was on your mind." The younger man nodded. "There was, and I didn't want to talk about it. I thought ignoring things made them easier." "It never does," the old man said softly. They stood silently for a moment until the younger man added, "I want to fix things. Not just here, but in my life too. I think I've avoided too much for too long." The old man gave a small nod. "It's good you realize that now. Many people take a lifetime." That conversation lifted a bit of the weight he'd been carrying. Apologizing didn't make him weak. It made him feel lighter. And when he picked up a tool and started working again, his hands felt steady, almost grounded. For the first time in a long while, he felt connected to what he was doing. During the lunch break, he went to see someone else he had unintentionally hurt, a close friend who had tried to help him, but ended up feeling pushed away. He found his friend sitting outside under a tree, eating quietly. "Can I sit?" he asked. His friend raised an eyebrow, but nodded. They both sat quietly for a minute. Then he said, "I didn't treat you fairly. You were trying to be there for me, and I shut you out. I shouldn't have." His friend looked at him, studying his face. "I wasn't upset because you didn't talk. I was upset because you pretended everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. You don't have to handle everything alone." He took a slow breath. "I know. I think I had forgotten that." They talked for a while, really talked, not just surface-level words. His friend shared things too, about how difficult it is to watch someone you care about slowly distance themselves. That conversation wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was simple, real, and honest, the type of conversation that builds bridges instead of walls. By the time he left, he felt something inside him shift. He wasn't fixed. Nothing magically resolved. But he felt more connected to people again, and that was a start. Later in the afternoon, he walked toward the place he had been avoiding the most. His home had become a symbol of everything he didn't want to confront: unfinished responsibilities, reminders of choices he had made, memories he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But today, he pushed the door open. The house was quiet. It wasn't messy, but it didn't feel alive either. It felt like a place where someone existed, but didn't truly live. He walked from room to room, touching familiar things: old photographs, a jacket hanging on the back of a chair, a stack of letters he hadn't opened. He sat down and finally opened the first letter. It was from someone who cared about him deeply, someone who had worried when he started pulling away. As he read the words, he felt something tighten in his chest. The letter wasn't blaming him. It wasn't angry. It was full of concern and kindness. He set it down and leaned back, taking slow breaths. He realized how much love he had taken for granted while drowning in his own confusion. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to process everything happening inside him. After sitting there for nearly an hour, he made a decision. If he wanted to rebuild his life, he needed to start with honesty and intention. He gathered the letters, placed them neatly on the table, and said to himself, one step at a time. In the evening, he walked to a nearby park. The air was cooler now, and families were scattered around: children playing, teenagers laughing, parents chatting, elders walking slowly with hands behind their backs. He sat on a bench and watched them. There was something peaceful about seeing people simply living, without complications or pretenses. A small child ran past him chasing a ball. The child tripped slightly, but then got right back up and continued running, laughing as if falling didn't matter. He watched that and thought about how simple life used to feel when he was younger. Back then, everything was immediate. If you fell, you got up. If something hurt, you cried. If you were happy, you laughed loudly without thinking about who was watching. Growing up, he realized, made people forget how natural emotions were meant to be. As he sat there thinking, he felt a strange calm settle inside him. The noise of the park didn't irritate him. The movement didn't overwhelm him. Instead, he felt like a part of the world again. Not someone standing at the edges trying to understand where he belonged. When it was finally time to leave, he walked back slowly, hands in his pockets, breathing in the cool air. He thought about tomorrow, not with fear, but with a quiet hope. He didn't expect everything to be perfect. He didn't expect all his problems to disappear, but he was willing to face them, and that alone made the night feel different. By the time he reached home, he felt tired, not in a heavy way, but in a peaceful one. The kind of tired that comes after a long day of doing something meaningful. Before sleeping, he looked at himself in the mirror. There were still signs of worry on his face, still traces of exhaustion, but there was something else to strength. Not the loud, dramatic kind. A gentle strength, calm and steady. He whispered to his reflection, "I'm trying." And for the first time in a long while, he believed it.